A crazed man smashed a beer bottle over a royal guard's head, watching in twisted satisfaction as blood dripped down his face. He thought it was his victory, but what happened next left the entire crowd in stunned silence. But before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel because tomorrow at the same time, we'll bring you another story of courage and discipline from the royal guards that you won't want to miss. The sound of shattering glass pierced the afternoon calm at Buckingham Palace as Mike Dawson hurled his empty beer bottle against a lamppost, causing tourists to flinch and step back. His eyes, bloodshot and wild, darted across the crowd with predatory intensity, searching for his next target of harassment. "What are you all staring at?" he slurred, stumbling forward in his wrinkled dress shirt, now stained with sweat and alcohol. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, but he seemed oblivious to the heat as he clutched another half-full bottle in his trembling hand. "Got something to say, have you?" A mother quickly pulled her young children behind her as Dawson lurched past, his dishevelled appearance and aggressive demeanour creating a ripple of unease through the gathered tourists. His once pristine office clothes told the story of someone who'd started the day in a very different state. The loosened tie and rolled-up sleeves, suggesting a man who'd lost more than just his composure. "Bunch of sheep," he muttered, taking another long pull from his bottle. The liquid courage seemed to fuel his paranoia rather than calm it. "All of you, just standing around, pretending everything's normal." His voice rose with each word, causing several elderly visitors to retreat toward the palace gates. The afternoon tour guide tried to continue her presentation, raising her voice slightly to compete with Dawson's increasingly volatile presence. The changing of the guard ceremony represents a tradition that dates back to Tradition? Dawson spat the word like poison, his attention snapping to the guide. "You want to talk about tradition?" He advanced toward her group, forcing them to scatter as he swung his bottle in wild gestures. "I'll tell you about tradition. It's all just control, isn't it? All of it." Security personnel had noticed the disturbance, but before they could respond, Dawson's attention shifted again. He spotted a group of teenagers taking photos, their laughter igniting something dark in his already unstable mind. The bottle in his hand gleamed ominously in the sunlight as he changed direction, stalking toward the unsuspecting youths with dangerous intent. "Think this is funny, do you?" he growled, his grip tightening on the bottle's neck. "Everything's just a bloody joke to you people." The teenagers' smiles faded as they registered the genuine threat approaching them, their casual tourist experience about to transform into something far more menacing. The teenagers backed away, but Dawson was quicker than his drunken state suggested. His hand shot out, grabbing one boy's backpack strap and yanking him close. "Not so funny now, is it?" he snarled, alcohol fumes washing over the terrified youth's face. "What are you filming, eh? Think I'm some kind of joke?" "We weren't filming anything," the boy stammered, trying to pull away. "Please, just let go." "Shut up!" Dawson roared, shoving the teenager hard enough to send him stumbling into his friends. "You're all watching me, all of you!" He took another long drink from his bottle, throat working as he swallowed deeply. An elderly man in a tweed coat stepped forward, leaning on his walking stick. "Now see here, young man, that's quite enough of that. These are just children." Dawson whirled around, abandoning the teenagers to focus on this new target. His fingers latched onto the old man's collar, twisting the fabric. "Children?" He laughed, a harsh, broken sound that echoed off the palace walls. "They're part of it. Everyone here is part of it." "Harold!" the man's wife cried out, her hands clutching her handbag in terror. Dawson's grip tightened, the bottle in his other hand swaying dangerously close to the elderly man's face. "You think I don't see what's happening?" Dawson's voice rose hysterically. "You think I don't know why you're all here?" He shoved the old man backward, sending him stumbling into his wife's arms. "Everyone watching, everyone judging, everyone plotting." The crowd had grown larger now, drawn by the commotion but maintaining a fearful distance. A mother shielded her young daughter's eyes as Dawson stalked past, his movements becoming more erratic with each step. The bottle rose to his lips every few seconds, each drink seeming to fuel his paranoia rather than dull it. A young couple tried to slip past, hoping to escape the volatile situation. Dawson's head snapped toward their movement. "Where do you think you're going?" He lunged forward, grabbing the woman's arm. "Got somewhere important to be? Someone to report to?" The woman's partner stepped between them. "Take your hands off her, now!" Dawson's response was explosive. He swung the bottle in a wide arc, forcing them to duck and retreat. "Don't you dare tell me what to do!" he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I know what you're all up to, all of you!" Palace security was moving through the crowd now, but Dawson's unpredictable movements made him difficult to approach. He continued his rampage, shoving an Asian tourist hard enough to send the man's camera clattering across the pavement, then grabbing a student's textbook and hurling it into a nearby bush. "Look at you all," he sneered, spinning in a circle to address the fearful onlookers. His shirt had come untucked, sweat staining the fabric despite the cool afternoon air. "Standing there, pretending. Always pretending." He raised the bottle to his lips again, tilting it nearly vertical to catch the last drops. The empty bottle came down with a sharp snap of his wrist, his eyes focusing on it with dangerous intensity. The lack of alcohol seemed to push him further over the edge, his breathing becoming more ragged, his movements more jerky and unpredictable. Through the haze of alcohol and paranoia, Dawson's bloodshot eyes finally locked onto the royal guard, standing at attention nearby. The guard's perfect posture and unwavering discipline seemed to trigger something deep in Dawson's fractured psyche. Here was everything he wasn't: controlled, respected, purposeful. "Well, well," he slurred, stumbling toward the guard with the empty bottle dangling from his fingers. "What do we have here? The perfect soldier, eh?" His lips curled into a sneer as he approached. "Standing there all high and mighty, thinking you're better than everyone else." The guard remained motionless, eyes fixed forward, though years of military training had already assessed the threat approaching him. Behind his ceremonial stance lay the coiled readiness of a combat veteran, aware of every subtle movement in his vicinity. "Look at him!" Dawson announced to the nervous crowd. "This is what they want us all to be, mindless puppets following orders." He moved closer, invading the guard's personal space. The stench of alcohol and sweat rolled off him in waves. "Bet you think you're something special, don't you? With your fancy uniform and your little hat?" The guard's eyes remained locked forward, his discipline absolute. But there was a subtle tension in his jaw now, a nearly imperceptible tightening of his grip on his rifle. He could smell the alcohol on Dawson's breath, could see the unstable rage in his eyes, could sense the situation spiraling toward violence. "Nothing to say," Dawson's voice rose sharply. He raised the empty bottle, tapping it against the guard's brass buttons. "Cat got your tongue, soldier boy? Or are you just too good to talk to regular people?" The glass clinked against the metal, each tap becoming more aggressive. A police officer at the edge of the crowd began speaking quietly into his radio, recognizing the dangerous escalation in Dawson's behavior. But before backup could arrive, Dawson's aggression ratcheted up another notch. "I asked you a question," he shouted, his face inches from the guards. Spittle flew from his lips as he ranted. "Think you're untouchable up here in your palace? Think your uniform makes you special?" He glanced at his empty bottle, shaking it as if hoping to find one last drop. "Well, I've got news for you. You're nothing. Just another cog in their machine." The guard's training screamed at him to react, to neutralize the threat before it escalated further. But centuries of tradition and protocol held him in place. His eyes remained forward, his posture perfect, even as every combat-honed instinct warned him of the impending violence. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Dawson's voice had taken on a desperate edge. The empty bottle trembled in his grip as his already tenuous control began to slip away completely. "You think you can just ignore me like everyone else? Like I don't matter?" The afternoon sun caught the guard's brass buttons, reflecting light into Dawson's eyes. Something about that gleam, that reminder of authority and order, seemed to push him over the final edge. His fingers tightened around the bottle's neck as his face contorted with pure rage. "Fine," he growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If that's how you want to play it." His knuckles whitened around the glass, muscles tensing as hatred and madness converged into a single, violent purpose. "Let's see how still you can stand after this." Time seemed to crystallize into perfect clarity as Dawson's arm drew back, muscles tensing beneath his sweat-soaked shirt. The empty bottle caught the late afternoon sun one final time, transforming ordinary glass into a deadly weapon. Several women in the crowd screamed warnings that seemed to come from far away, their voices muffled as if underwater. A child began to cry. But it was already too late. The bottle had begun its savage arc toward the guard's head, cutting through the air with deadly purpose. The impact came with a sound that would haunt witnesses for years to come, a sickening crack of glass against bearskin, followed by the explosive pop of the bottle shattering. Fragments sprayed outward in a lethal constellation, catching the sunlight like deadly diamonds. Some tourists would later swear they could count each individual shard as it split apart. The force of the blow drove the guard's head violently sideways, his bearskin cap absorbing much of the impact, but not all. Sharp edges of glass found their way past the ceremonial headgear's protection, carving cruel lines across his forehead. The first drop of blood appeared slowly, almost reluctantly, before gravity took hold. Then more followed, creating thin crimson rivulets that traced paths down his temple, stark red against skin that had gone pale, not from fear, but from iron discipline. For what felt like an eternity, the entire courtyard stood frozen in a tableau of horror. The sound of breaking glass seemed to echo endlessly off the palace walls, a violent percussion that shattered not just the bottle, but the very sanctity of the royal grounds. Parents clutched their children with white-knuckled grips, some covering young eyes, others too shocked to move. Tourists stumbled backward, cameras forgotten in trembling hands. Several veterans in the crowd stepped forward instinctively, their military training triggering muscle memories from distant battlefields. The instinct to aid a comrade under attack never truly fades. Dawson remained where he stood, still gripping the broken bottle's neck like some primitive weapon. A maniacal grin spread across his face as he watched blood seep from beneath the guard's cap, the sight of it seeming to feed something dark and primal in his alcohol-poisoned mind. "Not so perfect now, are you?" he taunted, brandishing the jagged remains of the bottle, its edges now crimson-tipped. "Let's see what else you can take." Through it all, the guard hadn't moved a muscle, hadn't even raised a hand to the wound. Blood ran down his face in steady rivulets now, staining his immaculate red tunic with expanding dark patches. But his eyes remained locked forward with unwavering focus. His discipline held firm, even as warm blood traced paths down his cheek and dripped with metronomic precision from his jaw. It was this absolute composure, this continued adherence to protocol even after such a vicious attack, that seemed to drive Dawson into an even deeper frenzy. "Still playing soldier?" he snarled, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and mad delight. The broken bottle rotated in his grip as he readied it for another strike, jagged edges catching the light. "Let's see how long you can keep that up." His arm began to rise again, but this time the jagged glass edges were aimed at the guard's exposed throat, where no bearskin cap would offer protection. The crowd's reaction was immediate and chaotic, surging forward and back like a wave caught in a storm. They were torn between the human instinct to help and the very real fear of the broken glass Dawson was wielding with such manic intent. Police officers were forcing their way through the throng, but the press of bodies slowed their progress. They were still too far away to prevent what was coming. The elderly veteran who had confronted Dawson earlier shouted a warning, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen firsthand how lethal a broken bottle could be. Blood continued to drip from beneath the guard's cap, each drop falling with military precision onto his uniform. 1, 2, 3, each marking time like a crimson metronome. His eyes hadn't moved. His posture remained perfect, but something shifted in his bearing, a subtle change that the combat veterans in the crowd recognized instantly. It was the same tension they had felt in distant war zones, when ceremony gave way to survival, when protocol met primal threat. As Dawson's arm reached its apex, jagged glass poised to strike again, the guard made his decision. The same training that had taught him to stand motionless for hours had also taught him a fundamental truth. Protocol existed for a reason, but it was never meant to be a suicide pact. When the safety of civilians was at risk, when lives were in danger, tradition had to give way to action. The guard's eyes finally moved, breaking their forward focus to lock onto Dawson's with laser precision. In that moment, as their gazes met, something passed between them, a silent communication that cut through Dawson's alcoholic haze like a blade. Combat veterans in the crowd recognized that look. They had seen it in the eyes of men who had faced death in the Hindu Kush, who had held the line in Helmand Province, who had learned that true strength lies not in violence but in the control of it. In that fraction of a second, as the broken bottle began its downward arc, Dawson finally saw what his alcohol-soaked brain had failed to recognize. He wasn't attacking some ceremonial statue, some tourist attraction in a fancy uniform. He was attacking a highly trained soldier who had simply been choosing not to respond. The realization dawned in his eyes, just as the guard's muscles tensed, ready to show him exactly what that meant. What happened next was a masterclass in military precision, executed with the kind of fluid efficiency that only comes from years of combat training. The guard's ceremonial rifle, despite its ornate appearance, moved like an extension of his body, shifting to his left hand with practiced grace. His right arm came up in a textbook-perfect block, executing a defensive maneuver that had been drilled into him countless times in close combat training. The movement was so swift, so seamless, that Dawson's alcohol-addled brain was still processing the start of the motion when his wrist was already locked in what felt like an iron vice. "That's enough," the guard's voice cut through the tension, with the quiet, unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded men in battle zones where hesitation meant death. His fingers found pressure points with surgical precision. Not the brutal crushing of a street fighter, but the calculated application of force that combat instructors perfect over years of training. Dawson's hand spasmed involuntarily, nerve endings singing with sharp pain as the broken bottleneck clattered against the ancient stones. But alcohol and madness had stripped away Dawson's self-preservation instincts. He launched a wild haymaker with his free hand, the kind of desperate punch thrown by someone who had learned to fight in bars rather than battlefields. It was aimed at the guard's bleeding face, but the guard's response was almost balletic in its efficiency. A slight shift of his head, barely 2 inches, let the clumsy blow slide past his ear, while his grip maintained perfect control of Dawson's other wrist. The movement was economical, almost gentle. The same kind of precision he'd used to disarm insurgents in close-quarter combat situations where collateral damage wasn't an option. "Last warning," the guard stated, blood still tracing disciplined lines down his face. His voice carried the same steady professionalism he'd maintained during firefights in Helmand Province. "Stand down." Dawson's response was primal, an incoherent scream of rage as he attempted to drive his forehead into the guard's face. But where Dawson saw an opening, the guard saw opportunity. His right hand released Dawson's wrist, only to find his collar with practiced precision, while his left hand secured the ceremonial rifle with the care of someone who understood that tradition and effectiveness weren't mutually exclusive. The following movement was a masterpiece of controlled force. Using Dawson's own momentum against him, the guard executed a perfect directional control technique, spinning him with the kind of smooth efficiency that spoke of countless hours of close combat training. As Dawson's face met the palace wall, the force was calibrated perfectly, enough to establish absolute control without causing unnecessary injury. The guard's breath remained steady, his movements crisp and precise, even as blood continued to flow from his wound. 8 years active service, the guard spoke, with the calm assurance of someone who had faced far worse situations. 2 tours in Afghanistan, the bearskin cap you just struck. Every soldier who wears it has earned that right through service in active combat zones. His voice maintained its professional edge, even as his blood created a stark pattern on Dawson's shoulder. This uniform you chose to disrespect. It's not just ceremonial, it's a symbol of centuries of tradition, discipline and sacrifice. Each button, each medal, each crease represents lessons learned in battles you couldn't imagine. Dawson's struggles were met with textbook counters, each of his movements anticipated and controlled with the kind of precision that distinguished professional soldiers from mere fighters. The guard's hold wasn't about domination, it was about control, about containing a threat with minimal force while maintaining maximum security. His techniques spoke of training in military installations where efficiency meant survival. "You're bleeding," Dawson spat, still trying to break free from holds that had been perfected in combat situations far more dire than this. "Not so perfect now, are you?" "This blood?" The guard adjusted his grip with microscopic precision as Dawson attempted another futile escape, his movements showing the muscle memory of someone who had performed these techniques under heavy fire. "I've seen worse in places you'll never know about. The difference is, those enemies were fighting for something they believed in. You're just lashing out because you can't handle your own demons." The police officers who had finally broken through hung back, their professional instincts telling them this was no ordinary restraint. They recognized the hallmarks of military close combat training. The perfect balance of force and control, the absence of unnecessary movement, the constant awareness of surrounding civilians. "The protocol you mocked?" The guard's voice carried across the now silent courtyard with parade ground clarity. "It's not about standing still like statues. It's about maintaining absolute control over every muscle, every reflex, every instinct. It's about having the discipline to show restraint when every combat instinct is screaming for action." His grip adjusted with micrometric precision as Dawson made another attempt to break free. "But when action becomes necessary, we execute with the same precision we show in ceremony." Blood continued to drip from the guard's wound onto Dawson's shoulder, creating a pattern that looked almost ceremonial in its regularity. Yet the guard's breathing remained steady, his movements precise, showing the same kind of pain compartmentalization that had served him in combat zones where medical attention wasn't an immediate option. "You thought the uniform made us weak." The guard's voice took on the same edge he'd used commanding patrols through hostile territory. "This uniform represents everything you lack, discipline that goes beyond standing still, honor that demands more than blind obedience, self-control that's been tested in situations where losing it meant death. These aren't just words to us, they're lessons written in blood and sacrifice." Dawson's resistance began to fade, whether from exhaustion, the dissipating alcohol, or the dawning realization that he was experiencing firsthand the difference between ceremonial presence and combat capability. The guard maintained his hold with unwavering attention, showing the same patience he'd learned waiting for air support in combat zones. "In Afghanistan," the guard continued, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of someone who had given orders under fire, "I faced enemies who had trained for years, who believed in their cause enough to die for it. Even they understood the concept of honor in combat. But you? His grip remained precise as Dawson's knees began to buckle. You attacked a symbol of order because you couldn't face your own chaos. That's not combat. That's cowardice. When the police moved in with handcuffs ready, the guard coordinated the transfer of control with the same precision he'd used handling prisoner transfers in combat zones. Each movement was measured, each position secured, ensuring there was no opportunity for last-minute resistance or civilian endangerment. The ceremony you mocked, the guard concluded, as he ensured Dawson was properly secured, exists to remind us of the traditions we uphold, but the training you just experienced, that's what ensures those traditions survive against people who mistake ceremony for weakness. Remember that the next time you see a guard standing motionless, that they're choosing to maintain protocol, not unable to break it. As the police officers secured Dawson in handcuffs, the guard retrieved his ceremonial rifle with practiced ease, his movements betraying no sign of the injury he'd sustained. A military medic who had been part of the crowd stepped forward, offering assistance for the bleeding wound. "After we secure the scene, sir," the guard responded professionally, resuming his post. Blood still trickled down his face, but his posture was perfect, his bearing unchanged. The bearskin cap, though damaged, remained proudly in place, a testament to the resilience it represented. Dawson, now fully restrained, had begun to sob, the combination of alcohol and adrenaline finally giving way to the reality of his actions. I didn't mean to," he stammered, but the words rang hollow in the afternoon air. "3 charges," one of the officers announced, his voice carrying clear disdain. "Assault on a military serviceman, public intoxication, and endangering civilians." He tightened the cuffs with practiced efficiency. "You'll have plenty of time to think about what you've done." The elderly veteran who had tried to intervene earlier approached the guard, standing at attention despite his age. "Royal Marines, sir, retired," he saluted crisply. "Would have stepped in, but you handled it like we were trained to." The guard returned the salute with perfect form, despite the blood now staining his uniform. "Thank you for your service, sir, and for being ready to assist." As Dawson was led away, his earlier bravado completely shattered, a palace medical officer finally approached the guard. "Sir, we need to treat that wound." The guard nodded once, but remained at his post. "Protocol states I maintain my position until properly relieved," he stated simply. His discipline, if anything, seemed even more pronounced now, as if proving that neither blood nor violence could shake his commitment to duty. The younger tourists who had been filming earlier watched in respectful silence as another guard marched out to relieve his injured colleague. The changing of the guard, usually a ceremonial display, took on new meaning as the wounded soldier formally handed over his post. Only then did he allow the medical officer to examine his injury. The cut wasn't deep. The bearskin cap had absorbed most of the impact, but it would need stitches. As the medical officer cleaned the wound, the guard's bearing remained professional, his responses measured and calm. "You could have responded sooner," the medical officer commented quietly while applying pressure to the wound. "Protocol allows for self-defense." "Protocol exists for a reason," the guard replied, his voice level. "If we break it every time someone tests us, it loses meaning. The uniform demands more of us than just reaction. It demands judgment." Nearby, some of the teenagers who had been Dawson's first targets watched the medical treatment with a new understanding. One of them whispered to his friend, "I always thought they just stood there for show. I didn't realize." "That's exactly what he wanted you to understand," the elderly veteran interjected, having overheard the comment. "The discipline you see isn't weakness, it's strength, the kind of strength that holds society together." As the medical officer finished treating the guard's wound, a senior palace official arrived to take his statement. The guard's report was precise, professional, and completely devoid of personal emotion, even when describing the bottle striking his head. "Will you be able to resume your duties tomorrow?" the official asked, though the answer was evident in the guard's bearing. "Of course, sir. the guard replied without hesitation. "The uniform requires no less." What would you have done in that guard's position? At what point would you have broken protocol to defend yourself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Think about this. How does this incident reflect the deeper meaning of what these guards represent? They're not just ceremonial figures. They're highly trained soldiers who choose discipline over reaction, restraint over impulse, duty over comfort. If this story helped you understand the true meaning behind the Royal Guard's unwavering dedication, make sure to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that reveal the real meaning behind these time-honored traditions. Click the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. And why not check out our other videos appearing on your screen right now? Each one offers a unique glimpse into the world of those who stand guard over centuries of tradition. Remember, true strength isn't about how quickly you react. It's about knowing when to hold firm and when to act.